Science in Pajamas. Alright, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about community interactions. Now, first, let's remind ourselves what a community is. So, you have an individual organism, like, say, a wolf. A group of that organism, of that same organism that lives together in a given area, is a population. So, one wolf is the organism, the wolf pack is the population. Now, all populations that live in an area or in an ecosystem together, all of those are what makes up the community. So, the wolf pack, the deer herd, all the little rabbits and squirrels and birds and bugs and grass and trees, etc. All of those make up the community. And some things that we're going to talk about today are community interactions. So, how do the different members of the community interact with each other? Now, there are three main ones that we're going to talk about, and they are competition. We have predation, and we have symbiosis. Now, I wrote competition on the board because that's going to be the first one that we talk about. Now, competition is when organisms are, I don't want to say competing, are trying to get resources in order to survive. So when we talk about that, we talk about how a resource, which is anything that's necessary for life, whether it is territory, mates, food, water, if you're a plant, access to sunlight, we have different organisms that are going to be fighting for these resources. They're going to be competing for them, which is why we call it competition. Now, there's different types of competition. Let's say we have a birdie an angry birdie. The birdie is competing for some seeds, some food, and is competing for this food with a squirrel. Angry squirrel. So they both want the same food. Well, they're going to have to compete for it. Maybe the squirrel wants all those seeds. Maybe the bird wants all those seeds. Now, could they each just take some? Yeah, but what if that's not enough to really, give them enough energy to survive and evade predators? So this type of competition is called interspecific competition. Interspecific. That means that it is between members of different species. So we have different species competing for the same resources. In this case, food. Now, what we also could have is we can have say we have So in this case, we have two bucks who are competing. So bucks are male deer. They are competing for the right to reproduce with the female. So they're competing for male rights. Now they're the same species in this case. So this is intraspecific. So intraspecific competition. They're still competing. Even though it may not be for food, food isn't the only resource that's necessary for life to begin or for life to occur. You also need to be able to pass on your DNA, your genetic material, to the next generation. So these two bucks are going to compete. They're going to fight for the right to mate with this female doe, the female deer. So interspecific is between different species. Intraspecific is between members of the same species. Now we do have something called the competitive exclusion principle. And what this says is that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. Now the niche is a species or an individual's role, its job in the environment. So it's going to include everything about it, from what kind of resources it eats to where its territory is. It's going to include the physical conditions that it needs to survive. So how much sunlight, how much water, when and how it reproduces, the type of food that it eats, as well as what is it food to, what kind of predator is going to prey on it. And what it's going to, essentially what it means is, since the niche is the organism's role in its environment, no two organisms can occupy the same niche. They can't have the same job. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be any competition. What it means is that they cannot compete for every single resource. When we talk about these two, the bird and the squirrel, they are competing for food, but they're not necessarily competing for the same niche. This bird might live in... There are some birds that prefer to live more in like bushes because they have some thicker leaf cover. So the leaves and the branches are smaller, but they're more intertwining, so it prefers the safety of nesting in the bushes. The squirrel is going to build its nest up in the higher branches of the tree to avoid predators like the eastern rat snake. So they're not necessarily competing for territory. They're definitely not competing for the mates. And even though they might be competing for this seed right here, there's could be other food sources that they will eat that the other won't. So maybe this bird can also feed on insects or mealworms or earthworms or things like that. Whereas this squirrel can also go after certain kinds of fruits and nuts. So they're not competing on every level. They're going to compete on some level, yeah, because they do have some shared food that they will eat, but they're not competing on every single level. If two organisms are competing on every single level, every single resource they're competing for, one of two things is going to happen. First of all, one organism is always going to win out. And the one that wins out is the one that's going to get access to all of those resources. So the loser, the organism that doesn't win out, one of two things is going to happen to it. Either one, it's going to die because it's not getting enough food, water, etc. Or two, it's going to leave that area and go to another area where it can establish a niche for itself. All right, so I hope that helps you guys understand competition. Now, we still have to talk about the two other types of community interaction. The next one is predation. So we have predation. Now, what predation is, it is a type of interaction where one organism is going to capture and eat another organism. Now, we call these different rows predator and prey. So the predator is the organism that is going to capture and eat the prey. Now, there are some very easy examples of this. You could think of the lion going after the zebra. The lion is going to stalk, it's going to hunt the zebra, it's going to chase it, attack it, kill it, and eat it. Wolves going after deer. Wolves are the predator, deer are the prey. A hawk eating a rabbit. The hawk is going to capture and eat its prey, which is the rabbit. But what we don't often think about is that prey doesn't mean animal. It just means that it is an organism that is being captured and fed on by another one. So the rabbit is a predator. The rabbit's prey is grass. Because the rabbit is capturing and feeding on the grass. Remember, that's all we said. A predator captures and feeds on prey. We didn't say that it was always preying on animals. In fact, when we defined predation, we said one organism captures and feeds on another. Grass is an organism. It's not one that we necessarily think of as prey, but plenty of types of plants have chemical defenses to prevent themselves from being eaten or preyed on. They can have thorns, they can have bitter flavors, they can even have poison. In fact, there's an article that I oftentimes like to use with my class about how trees can sense when a deer is eating them, and they will actually release a hormone that is picked up by other trees and causes a reaction in those trees to start secreting a bitter tasting chemical. So that, yeah, this one tree is kind of, being eaten up by the deer, but when the deer try and move on to the next tree, they might get one bite, but then they realize it tastes bitter and they're going to stop eating it because of the signal, the chemical defense that it mounted thanks to the first tree. Let's see. A lizard preying on insects. Although I still think the herbivores preying on the producers is the most shocking example that kids find surprising. But yeah, so that's all it is. It's one organism feeding on another. It is capturing and feeding it. The grass may not be able to run away from the rabbit, but the rabbit is still going up to it and is still feeding on it. All right. And then the last type of community interaction. We're only going to touch on this in this way because we're actually going to have a whole another video on this, is symbiosis. So symbiosis or symbiotic relationships are an interaction in which one organism benefits, so it's an interaction between species or between organisms, and one organism will always benefit. The other might or might not. So it's an interaction between organisms where one organism benefits. The other organism may or may not benefit. Komar with her horrible writing. So some examples of symbiotic relationship could be bees and flowers. They work together. The bees benefit because they get pollen and nectar from the flowers. The flowers benefit because bees help spread the pollen to other flowers, which then allows for fertilization of the plant. So that's an example where both organisms benefit. Another symbiotic relationship would be whales and barnacles. Barnacles tend to attach to the underside of whales, and they will just attach there and grow there. Now they benefit because they get constant access to food via the water. The whale doesn't benefit, but it doesn't get hurt either. It's just doesn't really care. And then another type of symbiotic relationship would be a tick and a dog. The tick benefits because as it attaches and drinks the blood of the dog, it gets nutrients. But the dog can actually be hurt in this process. So in this case, we see one organism benefiting and one organism being harmed. And that's what we call a parasitic relationship. So parasites are symbiotic relationships where one benefits and the other is harmed. With the case of the whale and the barnacle, we call that commensalism. And with the bee and the flower, we call that mutualism. But we're going to get to those in our next video. Anyway, so we'll just leave it at this for now. Alright, so I hope that helps. I hope it was educational, and I hope it helped you understand a little bit more about competition, predation, and symbiotic relationships. Alright, guys, until next time, you take care of each other. Alright.